I'm Tim, or Vulcan, I guess, more often during this weekend of the year anyway. And if you were here to see the CFT, or CTF, talk with the last 20 years of organizers, which incidentally is all the years. So we have from the beginning all the way to the ones that are currently organizing it up here on the panel. And I believe the current organizers this is the last one, right? Yeah, so stepping down this year, and every few years the current organizers step down, and there's some process for passing the baton. And one of the reasons that this talk is on the docket this year is to answer questions of people that think they might want to step up and take the baton, and also to have sort of an archival reference for when this happens in the future. So again, I'm Tim. I'm going to do my best to moderate these folks up here when we get to the panel time, but I'm also going to sort of lay a foundation of sort of the basics of what CTF is. I'm not going to try and make too many assertions. Now, I am sort of inherently biased, being one of the organizers for a few years and also being a participant for a few years, but I'll make every effort to sort of remain neutral up here and pass the questions off to our panel of experts here. Now, the talk is geared towards organizing CTF, so I'll do a little bit of explaining about what CTF is, but it's from an organizer perspective, right? And some of us even do CTFs from time to time professionally. But in most cases, these slides are geared specifically to what CTF means in the context of DEF CON. So what is CTF, right? So we're not going to cover what is CTF in depth, but at the basics, it's a cybersecurity-based capture the flag contest, right? So it's just like flags, and you play with hills and kids and stuff, except the flags are digital, also called an exercise or an event or a game. Typically, it's all geared towards demonstrating some minimum bar of proficiency, or ideally some bar of excellence in fields of cybersecurity. So there's different models for organizing this, and we'll go over a couple of them in a bit, but they sort of stress different things. And as an organizer, you get to decide how you're going to stress the different sort of areas of excellence. CTF exercises are becoming much more common. So these days you can almost play about every other weekend if you're okay playing in these remote competitions that happen all over the world. So there's a circuit, so to speak. And there's also a multitude of contests that sort of just tack on CTF at the end, where it's very domain specific, like the social engineering CTF or ICS CTF or something like that. And some of those bear more resemblance to the game that we're going to talk about today than others. But in some cases, this really just means contest. In other cases, there are actually flags that could be captured. So going all the way back to the basics, if we're capturing the flag, we need to talk about like what the flag is, right? Well, it's the thing that needs to be captured, but from an organizer's perspective, that actually has, there's a lot to sort of suss out there. Is it just random text? Well, if you just use random text, then from a participant's perspective, it's difficult to understand whether you've actually found a flag or whether it's just actually random text, right? That's encrypted or compressed or something like that. So it's somewhat difficult to know when you're done and when you found the flag. Also from an organizer perspective, it might result in a lot of guessing because the participants are unsure. So you end up with this sort of denial of service sort of situation where people are just guessing repeatedly, hoping that they found the flag, but they're not really sure. So then the next thing you do is you try and add some structure. You know, it's a certain size, it's a certain format, it has a particular prefix. All of these things sort of limit that space of brute forcing, right? So now you increase the likelihood of guessing correctly for people that do want to guess. You also open the door to all kinds of different defenses, like consider writing an IDS signature for the prefix that you know is going to be there because the flag has a specification. So there's these trade-offs that happen when you even define something as basic as what is a flag. Yeah, that's broken. So even beyond defining sort of the specification for what a flag is, there's a lot of other mechanics that happen around the flag. So if flags are stolen, you sort of have to prove that you've actually stolen it, right? So you have to go back and assert to the organizers that you've successfully stolen it. And over the years, that has really matured over time from verbal or writing on paper to email to now you have sort of rich-ish web APIs, right? Solid services where there's structure and protocols around how to sort of automatically or in an automated fashion submit flags to web APIs or scoreboard servers. And then there's all these sort of game decisions that have to be made, some of them made by the participants, where flags might be shared. You have collusion between teams for potential collusion. Do flags have a preset, predefined constant value, or does it change over time, maybe being diluted as more people have stolen flags from easier services? Do flags expire? If you steal one at the beginning of a 48-hour period, is it worth the same amount at the end of the 48 period? Is it worth anything? All of these things sort of go into the mechanics of how that particular game is going to operate and adjust the game strategies that the participants are going to adopt. So then what is DEF CON CTF specifically? Well, there's no shortage of quotes. These are just ones from the top hits when you do a Google search, but the assertion that I think most of the people up on this panel would say is that DEF CON is one of the highest regarded CTFs out there, right? And it's kind of grown over the years from being one of the oldest and sort of one of the only to being the World Series or the best of the best, right? So typically the phrase DEF CON CTF, if you hear somebody say it, they're referring specifically to the on-premise version of the game, which starts tomorrow morning, right, at 9 a.m. and goes till Sunday, right? It goes throughout the weekend. So in the beginning, there were the goons, or more specifically, there was Miles, right? And so DEF CON CTF is one of the oldest and longest running. There are some others that have been around for a while, like the UCSB's ICTF comes to mind. But even ICTF is fairly restricted until just this year was sort of academic only, right? And they opened up for you guys, right? So as a pre-qualifier for this year, they opened it up so it's not academic affiliated, but DEF CON's got a long history of being very approachable and very open. And it's one of the longest running CTFs. It's also one of the oldest contests that's still running at DEF CON. So back at DEF CON 4 was the first one. It was just called Capture the Flag, or Network Capture the Flag, I think a little bit later. And it has certainly grown over time. So while this is DEF CON 25, it's CTF 22. Uh-oh. There we go. So if you look at a quick timeline, again, in the beginning there were goons. Sort of later on, teams more formally organized and sort of had a multi-year approach to organizing. We may switch different computers yet. So around the year 2000, it was clear that organizing needed to be a team sport. Let's go back one and see. It's less epilepsy. Now CTF, now with less epilepsy. Sort of around 2000, it was clear that organizing needed to be a team sport, right? There were other hacking competitions. Hope, for example, had something, but there was nothing that really had sort of the network component, the defensive component. Yeah, we got one more. Let's see if this will last. No? All right. So in the way of a roadmap, which might stay there for a few seconds. Nope. Let's go back and forth here.
Let me try turning it off.
Quick, look at it. So in the way of a roadmap, there's sort of different milestones that happened over the years. In the beginning,
hey, Tim,
there were.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sorry.
Just me. I just wanted to say he's had two problems here that are totally classic. What happens every year when you come with new technology, and happens every year with organizing these contests, We don't know necessarily who's going to be in the audience, what words to use to say, to talk to make things work right, and we definitely don't know what cables to bring.
But they do provide testing harnesses in the speaker room, which work fine. It's fixed. You had to go kick the cable, apparently. It's unfixed. Yeah, there's so much in between here and there.
He puts his hat on.
Right.
Yeah, we'll just skip over it.
We're losing people.
There's sort of different milestones that happen throughout the years, right? There's the realization that teams are going to be competing, right? Even though it wasn't necessarily organized as a team competition. There's the realization that teams are required for organizing, right? It's too much for one individual or a couple of individuals to handle. Fast forward to there's so many people that want to play that there needs to be some sort of qualifying round in order to gate the people that can actually make it to what's now known as the finals or the DEF CON CTF that's on premise. And then the sort of different things that happen sort of along the way, like the inclusion of the game outside the game with the meta game, and moving to IPv6 and badges that have game code on the badges. And then last year was actually the first year, and perhaps the only year, that the architecture and the format of the game were announced like long ahead of time, so you could actually spend time developing tools as a team and come in with tools that you knew were going to work. Right?
We actually announced last year that we were having a custom architecture. It's like a 9-bit Middle Indian monstrosity.
Middle Indian is not actually a thing, by the way.
No.
It totally is now.
It totally is
It
now.
is now.
Yeah, it is now. So yeah, now we actually have a completely custom architecture that the team just got this morning. They just got this manual this morning.
So preparation before 9 a.m. is perhaps of limited utility, right? So getting back to what is Capture the Flag, if we kind of grossly break them down into two categories, this has again been covered in other presentations, so we won't spend too much time on it, but the two broad categories are attack defend and game board or Jeopardy style. And the big thing in attack defend is that the participants are directly connected to each other, so defense actually becomes a big component of the game. Also, service level availability, or SLA, becomes part of the game. The parts that need to be vulnerable and able to be attacked have to be there and running. So everybody's typically level set. Think of like a VM that has custom software and it's sort of distributed to all the teams. There's different ways to do that, but that's a good analogy. And ultimately, it's composed of a set of challenges, and that's another thing that matured over time, the concept of challenges or services. And these are sets of custom software that typically run with some amount of concurrency. There's debate on how many challenges concurrently make a good CTF or not. So conversely, the Jeopardy style is much like the show, right? You've seen the show. It's a grid of questions. Participants are not connected to each other, so defense is typically not part of these games. And you solve a series of challenges where the order might be determined or might be, say, controlled by the leader, by the organizer. And the categories might be completely arbitrary, or they might be designed with certain learning objectives or goals, such as gating for CTF, demonstrating proficiency in subjects that would work well when you get here for the weekend. There's also hybrids and things that don't quite fit, but broadly these are the two. So Jeopardy style worldwide, or just proportionally in the number of CTFs that happen, is by far the most common. It's possibly more diverse within a single event because defining what a question is very broad, whereas you define what a software service is in an attack-defend game is perhaps relatively confining. And it's arguably easier to organize for several reasons. So today, DEF CON, well, when you say DEF CON CTF, it means the thing here. There's typically a Jeopardy style one that gates everybody as a qualifying round. So this was introduced in 2004, Caesar. You did qualifying, right?
Turns out, yeah.
Yeah, we were just debating that.
Yeah.
No, Caesar was like, we didn't do quals. I was like, I remember playing in your quals,
Yeah.
so I'm
the
pretty
last,
sure you did.
The last year, so on the chart it should show, but you can't see it because it causes epilepsy. But I think the last year that the Ghetto Hackers ran started quals.
Yeah,
and
that was all DD back in the day. Like that was literally
DD
like force of one. Yeah.
Although Miles brought us along, DD implemented so much stuff. You really would have to understand the guy to know how amazing he could pump out user mode Linux router system with double NAT and firewalling and stuff in a night, in an evening.
They also had some pretty crazy constraints in their quals too. Like I remember specifically playing and not being able to actually make any kind of connection into that box or out of that box other than the literally just terminal IO.
Really
and so we had to write like GU encoder and decoder routines into like telnet so that we could like move binaries to the box.
Yeah. Their first qual was just a race to finish eight levels of a challenge.
Yeah,
that was it.
Yeah, it was totally linear. Yeah, exactly.
So we're having a sad realization up here that anything with pictures appears to anger the projection system, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of pictures in the rest of it. So you've seen the board. This is what the board looked like when when Kenshoto had quals in 2006 anyway. And there's a starter question, there's a hint that kind of points off somewhere, either download a file or go to some web service. And maybe I should try and switch computers here. But unlike Jeopardy, so the leader controls the next question, but unlike Jeopardy, other teams can sort of catch up and answer the previous questions. I might just try and switch briefly here.
We can probably fill the space.
Yeah, go for it.
We're going to talk about stuff while he works. That's usually how organizing CTF is.
I was going to say, yeah, it's pretty ad hoc to begin with. Basically, something goes awry every time. This is its own sort of like micro example of how CTF actually works in real life. Because it turns out nothing goes to plan. It's the old like, planning is useful, but plans are useless kind of thing.
And I'll point out that Tim was a part of DD Tech, and DD Tech's CTFs were famously broken.
Oh, yeah. There was one year, I think you completely erased the scores from one day. Yeah, we were upset with that. Yeah. And actually, playing CTF, most of my CTF experience was under DD Tech, and my 2 black badges is from winning their first and final year. But funny story, actually, we were playing quals, or organizing quals. I once wrote a mock web server with a CGI script underneath it. And the bug was in the CGI script. But all the web script kiddies were like, yay, a web challenge. And then so they started uploading like PHP shells and Python shells. And one team in particular uploaded a Python shell connectback with a hard-coded IP address and port. So I'm like, let me play with this. So I killed it since it wasn't actually part of the game, or a necessary part of the game. And they did it again. It's like, all right, this is what's going to happen. Killed it, just immediately started connecting back to them. And then finally got to connect back, and they started typing commands. And me trying like ls, like slash, and then like, cat something, like, let me type some other crap. Eventually I realized they were talking to somebody. But yeah, it's so much.
Yeah, it took an amazing amount of like, self-control to not mess with everybody else's exploits. Essentially, like people would land stuff on boxes, and like watching it happen, you could like connect to it faster than they could. And so, like, not going and grabbing everybody else's shells when you're the organizer just for fun was actually like a massive, massive self-control.
The reason I did it though is because it wasn't necessary to land the challenge.
Right.
So that was actually the year. So I don't know if you guys know GeoHot. He popped the service by figuring out that .bash RC was writable by general users. So he wrote cat flag out to /tip /something. So he just waited until somebody else exploited it because they were just going to run bash, because when you run bash, whatever. And so he just waited and just saw that file pop up in temp and got the flag. I mean, that's the way to do it.
We actually had a whole like sub like focus area that we called the dirty tricks department, which was basically like trying to figure out all the errant conditions in everybody else's exploitation methodology. So like I remember one year there was a team that was doing really, really well, but they were always like their payload would actually cat the flag to a file in temp, and so we could just like walk around behind them and mop up all the flags that they were getting too.
Nice. One thing I found that was where was going? Never mind. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Want to finish your thought?
No, go ahead.
There's too much of a thought.
Yeah, you're in the middle of your thing. Go ahead.
I will say that I walked into the speaker room earlier today with my laptop that's running Linux and plugged it in, and everything worked. And then I didn't tell anybody. I was like, oh, Linux, and it finally works. It understands how to do this.
It's the year of Linux on the desktop.
Later, and I tried it again, and it worked again. And then I got up here, and I'm like, oh, no. And now I have a Mac plugged into the projector, and it's working fine. So I guess it's still not.
Go back and show your timeline. I thought that was a good idea. You should flip back to your timeline.
Yeah, agreed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nobody got to see that.
You can go left, right?
Yeah, I'm a few slides down now. Great. So now we have timelines with no epilepsy. I kind of went over a few of the parts, and this is by no means exhaustive. It's just sort of like the things that stood out in my memory and sort of it worked well for the slide deck, right? But it definitely has a lot of the pieces that matured over time with the qualifier introduced in 2004, and then the tradition that continues now with returning the returning champion. So Ken Shoto would be inviting the returning champion back for the first time in 2005. And there's sort of these, I don't know, dirty tricks or twists or things that sort of make it hard to come in prepared, right? So like one of the things that this year makes it hard to come in prepared is that it's an entirely custom architecture that wasn't announced until 9 a.m. this morning, right? So that's like a way that preparation is difficult. Some other examples of that going back in 2006, you had to submit keys over DTMF.
We were just talking about that too. I remember basically everybody. So we had deployed like an actual, like, I think it was an asterisk. Yeah. And so basically all the tokens, all the keys were just, really big, entirely numeric digits. And so we were making everyone, like, they would pick up a phone and it was like, press 1 to submit a key, press 2 to talk to a member of Ken Shoto. And so basically all the teams had to like run out into Vegas trying to like buy modems and like had to like write their own little like DTMF like, scripts to submit tokens, because otherwise the first few tokens that were being submitted by people, they were, first of all, they were like 32 digit numbers, like they were big. And everybody's like, beep, 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 beep. Shit, I fucked it up.
You have to physically hang up.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and you couldn't submit more than one token per call, so you had to actually hang up the phone and do it again.
We had so many tokens, we exceeded the available bandwidth to submit our tokens. We couldn't submit them fast enough.
Yep. Yeah, so everybody ran out to Fry's to try and find modems. And
which also has like
people were like, how do I connect something over serial to my like modern laptop?
Yep. Which also has like interesting ramifications, because then next year, like teams would buy out all the modems, like, just in case.
And then we didn't use modems next year.
Yeah. Good. They have good return policies.
They do.
But there's other things that sort of go through the times. Multiple hosts, IPv6. A lot of people were sad face when it was all IPv6, and they had a lot of IPv4 tools and shellcode and so forth. So MSP 430 architecture on the badges, sort of midway through legit BS, and then again this year with the custom architecture. So these are sort of some of the milestones. By no means exhaustive, but as I already said, the one that I want to focus on now is the qualifying round, because that gets into the style of game that's game
Actually,
board
before
style.
you jump off that slide, can I like mention one other thing?
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting pattern that's shown as a result of this slide, which is the like burnout cycle of hosting CTF. If you notice, almost all of those are the same-ish, like maybe off by 1 year here and there or whatever, because the just Herculean level of effort that goes into creating CTF in general literally causes like internal drama and burns out teams over time.
It's a second job. Like,
it's literally, so like as an example, during Ken Shoto CTF, we had, full-time jobs and actual real life stuff to do besides, CTF, and then had an 8-month development cycle every year for CTF. And by the end of it, we were just like, nope, not doing this again.
How many hours a week did you guys work?
Oh my God, it was literally a second full-time job for almost the entire team.
Wow. We had Didi, so we went like 4 hours a week.
I know, right?
And he worked.
And you guys were like, Didi, go do a bunch of stuff.
What'd you do this week?
So
what's our contest like?
Lightning, who wrote the architecture for this, started in 2015.
Yeah.
So.
To be fair, it took until a lot longer. So if you kind of fast forward, the previous slide showed a Ken Shoto board from 06. Here's another one from 08. I think maybe even the same code or the same style was used in 2007. It looks very similar anyway. But you can see that the board is sort of staying the same, static, as Ken Shoto evolved. You do get to define sort of the areas of excellence and the categories. There's an aspect that the organizer will have to decide of how approachable do you want the open qualifier. Anybody can sign up, right? So how approachable do you want it to be for novice players? So typically that's solved with sort of a trivia category and also the lower point value ones where they're very approachable to
approachable enough that for all the years we hosted it, the Trivia 100 had the same answer. It was. There you go. It was literally hack the blank, blank the planet,
The last
hack blank,
we could-
blank.
And our last version was blank, blank, blank.
Yeah.
Yeah, they submitted a version blank, 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 and people just submitted hack the planet.
Yeah.
We actually have a baby's first category now.
Yep.
So it's all like baby's first heap exploit.
Yep. Cool.
So through the years, so here's the next set of organizers, DD Tech. Obviously a different look and feel, but very similar, very similar semantics. It's still Jeopardy, it's still categories. You're still choosing the area of excellence, so to speak. So it's when you go around to other talks, it's sort of all the same things, right? Crypto, cross-site scripting, buffer overflows, heap overflows, right? The box is open to any of the security related fields. And then the current organizer, right, have a slightly more Japanese game show, right? This is one of the earlier ones from 2013. But the concept of qualifying the teams through this gate has persisted since it started. It really filters down to the handful of teams that are going to be present here.
Do you guys know?
DEF CON.
Do you guys know anybody who's been an organizer and stuff? Do you guys know, like offhand, the total number of like I actually clicked I am beginning to play quals? Because those numbers are impressive.
We'll get there.
Oh, okay.
I should have said at the beginning that I made these slides and they haven't actually seen them, so there might be
True
some
story.
disagreement. And trying to be honest and faithful, I've kept everybody in the dark. So the basic organization of the game is the same, has remained the same, and other CTFs around the world sort of take a similar approach, although they modify like how you get through the board and so forth. So one thing you might have noticed, the astute observer, through the boards that we've looked at, some of the same teams keep showing up. Like everybody up here and anybody out there that's a team know that. But you see the sort of regulars, the familiar faces that come back. And teams have really started persisting over time, back even when the ghetto hackers were playing and then organizing. And these are teams that sort of prepare and practice and build tools and test tools and things year round. So it's on a cycle.
Not the ghetto.
What's that?
The ghetto did not. Sort of. I mean, a few hours a week. We drank a lot.
But you had DD. So.
I said that teams exist that do it. So they develop and maintain tools and teach processes and so forth, and you can sort of track them. These are just points in time, so it doesn't say anything about how their final placing in quals, but you see the same teams kind of over and over, both in quals and also at finals. So much that it's actually tracked somewhat formally now. So this is a website called CTF Time. There's other ones, but this one has sort of emerged as the predominant one. And it's sort of mostly opt-in, so it's you might not be as tracked as you want to be, but when the results are posted publicly, the teams are known, and based on pattern matching on the IDs, they're sort of matched together. But individuals can sort of affiliate with the team and opt in. But these are tracked over time, right? So these teams persist. It's for some, it's again a second job kind of situation. There's formulas. There's APIs you can use to extract the information and verify that your rankings are correct. Even so, still subjective, right? Somebody's still saying, oh, that CTF was harder than this one by some metric, right? And the formulas still have to be plugged in. There's still interesting opportunities for cooperation and collusion and what happens when you switch teams and all that sort of thing. So how many will participate? Right? So we go back to the timeline, and you can see in the bar graph. I don't know if you can read the numbers very well, but the largest bar is 414, and the smallest bar is 162. I didn't have numbers from the early Kenshoto days.
Yeah, I
on how
don't
that
think
worked.
we do either.
I didn't have them, and then I couldn't find them. So, but you can see there's a bit of a trend line, right, in the teams. And it's important to know, which I think Vizzy was getting at, is how many teams are actually participating, which is vastly different than how many teams registered, right? So I think last year there were 1,500 teams that registered, I think Vito said. So 1,500 teams registered, 276 actually submitted something, right? Which isn't a perfect metric, right? There might be some people that tried to play and just couldn't figure out Hack the Planet, right? And they didn't submit anything.
Right.
It's possible, so it's not a perfect metric. But this is a good approximation of how many teams are playing, right? Not how many people. Teams can have many people. They probably have at least 8 in most cases, but...
Or 50 if you're School of Root.
We don't discriminate.
There's no rules in
Equal
CTF.
opportunity. So you can see it trending up. There's sort of other caveats in that registering shadow teams might have some advantage depending on how the game is structured and how flags have value. So having extra teams on your team might be useful, and so forth. You can even, in some cases, dilute flag values strategically. So then the other flip side of how many will participate, that's how many play in open qualifiers, but how many are actually going to play when you get to Las Vegas, right? There's logistics in setting up the right amount of tables and how many prizes and what kind of orchestration you need to run. So when the Ghetto Hacker started, it was 8, right? And it was always 8. And where did 8 come from?
I think we had, no, it's probably Miles.
That's how many teams we could fit tables in the room.
Okay, fire code, essentially.
It was fire code and like lines of network. And so we built some really nice PVC structures to run the networking cables, and that's where 8 came from.
Yep. And my working theory was 8-port switch, or 8-port hub at the time. Yeah.
There was never, you guys never had, I think we ended up being the first ones to like implement like a team table limit. I don't think you guys had that, right? Because we also saw like the instances of teams, 8 or 10 or however many teams were in the ballroom at the time. We would see one table with like 3 dudes and another table with like literally people like crowded around with laptops and stuff.
Yeah. There are fire code considerations there too.
Like the Immunix team.
So anyway, you can see that one of the things that DD Tech wanted to do as organizers was expand the competition across several dimensions, and one of them was size. So it kind of ramped up a little bit. The first one should probably have an asterisk in that there weren't actually 10 viable teams. There was one sort of deceptive team. So really only 9 teams in the first year. And then the last year that DD Tech ran it, there were 20, and that we were sort of gently pushed because it was DEF CON 20 to have 20 teams. And then Legit BS maintained for a little while and has settled on 15 in the most recent years. So how many teams you'll support is another question that you'd have to ask as an organizer. All right, so this competition, once you get to Vegas and these 10 teams or 15 teams get here, how are you going to implement this attack defend game, right? So fundamentally, you're going to be concerned about scoring. There are 4, I don't know, here there's 4 basic components, but there's going to be basic building blocks, right? There's offense, there's defense. If you have defense, you probably need some amount of SLA. And then there's this concept of like other points with like bonus points granted via breakthroughs or other stuff. So offense is going to be stealing flags or corrupting flags, right? You can like take one or you can burn one or whatever. And these have to be combined in some way to come up with a score that you can then use to declare a champion, right? So a score might be offense times defense times SLA. That has pros and cons, right? If any of those is 0, your total score is 0, so you can drive to 0 real quick. So if you have no offense, do you get no points? If you have no defense, do you get no points? Maybe that's the kind of game you want to run. I don't know. Maybe you do more of a summation, right? If you add them all together, now a 0 score in any one of them doesn't drive you to 0, but it also doesn't have that big of an effect. So you can have slightly more complex formulas where SLA maybe is the multiplier, meaning you have to allow your opponents to play in order to score any points, right? If you have 0 SLA, it means nobody can attack you, nobody else can sort of play the game. So you want to encourage the game to be played. And then these need to work over time, right? We have the concept of rounds. You're going to play all weekend, so now this has to be added up over these fixed or variable length 5-minute, 15-minute rounds, whatever. So now your round score is the summation of these. The round score is the formula and the game score is the summation. And then you might have multiple services, right? These concurrent services, these 10 vulnerable things that are running on your host that need to be added together. So maybe you end up with a formula that looks like this down at the bottom. And this is by no means like the right formula or even one that'll really work well, but you kind of get the idea that there's some mechanics that go into devising the formula that you need to have the score. And there's value in having this well-defined ahead of time. Many other methods. Once you even have these formulas figured out, you need to measure it all, right? So you have SLA. So this might be a port scanner, but now they're like much more robust polling, right? And that's very service specific, testing different code paths. If a flag is corrupted for offense, the organizers need to tell somehow. There's a lot of sort of game strategies around sort of permanently overriding other people's flags and things like that. So modern CTFs employ custom kernels and hypervisors and traps and all of these things in order to detect that our override has happened. similar protections for reads. And then defense is sort of the absence of offense, right? You must be doing good because nobody's successfully attacking you. So none of this is set in stone. Every year there's new opportunity to revise and come in with new scoring methods. There are more questions here that will need to be answered, right? Will there be bonus points? Will the scores always increase? How important is offense, and so forth?
Some of the important parts about what you're saying, some of the formulas he was just talking about, if I turn off my computers and start hacking, then the game's over, right? It's no fun. It really is difficult to convince security people to do blue team when they're here for a red team contest. That figuring out how to game things has been the evolution of the game, really making it fun.
Absolutely. That's the whole dirty tricks department. Yeah. I mean, we had dudes like basically going and like, so when we were playing, our dirty tricks department was doing stuff like, we had a guy that did physical pen testing for a living. Like he was the guy who talked his way into data centers and did all that kind of thing. And so he had like a high and tight, he was, ex-military, whatever. So he'd roll around in like camo and like, camo pants and like a, DEF CON regulation black shirt or whatever. And he would actually like never ever talk to us. We would send someone away from the table to like make drops and like meet with him. Who he was rolling around doing things like brushing a CD off, like brushing burned CDs off of someone else's table, and he had like duct tape rolled in a loop on the bottom of his shoe, and he would walk with a limp so that he wouldn't like stick it down, but like a camo guy walking with a limp, like, no big deal. So he would literally go by tables, brush CD-ROMs off, stick them to the bottom of his shoe, and walk away with them.
Yeah. There's many corollaries to that. So these services that are running concurrently, you need to define how much you're going to define them, right? Is there a spec for this? Like what kind of a box are they going to fit in? The more of a specification you have for a service, the easier it is to automate and to test and deploy and to redeploy and to rebuild, and also to outsource, it turns out, because if you have a spec, you can tell somebody to write against the spec. If it's an open box, you might come back with something that's really hard to organize around. But lots of decisions about how many you're going to run, what's their point value, and so forth. You need to decide how teams are going to interact with the infrastructure. So they're connected together. There's some way that they're interacting with each other. But they're also going to have to interact with all of the bits and pieces that you've assembled and created. Will they operate their own defended host? Is it a VM? Will they route through the table? Right? Do they have an uplink that's on the table? Do they get a tap? Is the tap delayed? And so forth. There's lots of decisions that have to be made about how the game is going to be represented and how it's going to be interfaced with. One thing that I think everybody, another thing that's continued over time is having an immense desire to protect the integrity of the game. Right, and there's lots of ways that you can take that to heart and infer.
Specifically, it needs to be just hackable enough.
Right. It's inherently, it's already a hostile network, right? It's already hostile people. It's designed to be vulnerable, right? But you want to have a fair game. You want to make sure that when you're crowning a champion, you're sure that that's the champion. It was the right person. You're confident in your scoring. You're confident in your infrastructure. So there's lots of different pieces of that. This is another slide that's by no means exhaustive. But you want to take, I think that at least up until now, there's been extreme measures taken to protect the integrity of the game. And the non-technical side, there's even things about like table positioning, right? Is it unfair to put one table sort of like with their backs to the door when you open in the room? Is it unfair to give one team a particular ID that might result in nulls in their shellcode because of their network subnet and things like that, right? So you really want to strive to be fair.
Who did that exactly?
So when we designed that custom badge you mentioned, unfortunately, we gave index numbers to people who placed in our qualifier, and PPP got first, so we gave them the 0 index. Unfortunately, the 0 index was not exploitable on the RF network.
So that's one instance. Like everybody's got their instance.
Oh, for sure.
So plan for failure, right? Like in this case, bring a Mac that also can do your presentation. Then this is the kind of thing where I'm sure we can just go down the table and everybody can talk about the different failures, but one of the failures that happened in this picture, I'm pretty sure this is the right picture, was a sort of a central scoring database had a hard disk just totally tank, like right in the middle of the competition, right? So you have to have ideally some resiliency, some like failover, some backup plans, right? Like the sort of the game must go on mentality, right? So what will the rules be? So I think typically, historically, the rule is no physical attacks, right? And this is really to keep people from physically being hurt, right? This is actually there, and I think there's good reason to have that there.
Don't cut our cables because we had to do that. Like that would cost us money, so don't cut our stuff.
Yeah, so there's other things, right? There's
Those
no
were
physical
not the
attacks,
rules
and then
when we played.
it sort of expands into things like don't mess with the infrastructure, right? Don't destroy personal property, right? Don't toss the team.
Messing with the infrastructure used to be like part of the game.
That was the game.
That was the game.
That was the game.
Well, this is
we
why
we hacked part of the scoring system one time, and basically, like, I remember, I think it was Didi that came up to the table, and he's like, "That's really cool. Knock it the fuck off." Like,
Did you receive bonus points for your effort?
yeah, definitely. I mean, that was always the thing, is like, you kind of want to reward people for doing something novel and new. I remember the year that we had, again, sort of the de facto rule, like, don't cut cables, right? Because obviously you could walk around with a razor blade on your shoe and like cut cables all day long. And so one of the things that we had said was, basically denial of service isn't actually that cool, right? So like, do something cool. And if you're trying to do something cool and you mess it up, like, okay, we'll have a little bit of forgiveness and like, it'll be all right. So I remember, I think it was School of Roots Captain John Boss comes up to me and he's like, "So Vizzy, we were trying to do something really neat. I was standing, kind of the tables were like this, and actually this was a lessons learned, but we had the sort of ring of tables for the people running, for Kenshoto in the middle, and the tables had skirts on sort of both sides, like the hotel does. And so we're standing there next to the table." You remember this story now. Yeah.
I know
So, right. So we're standing there, and this was actually the DTMF year. So we're standing there, and he's like, "So what if a friend of mine theoretically was trying to do something really cool, but kind of messed it up, and now maybe a team needs a new cable?" And I'm like, "What'd you do?" So he's like, "Well, you see," and he lifts up the skirt of the table, and there's a dude underneath our table, like right next to me. And he's like, "Well, we haven't been able to get him out for like 2 hours because we managed to get him under there to try and..." So they had gone and bought a 900 megahertz phone, and were trying to wire it into one of the other team's POTS line to literally broadcast whatever tokens they were submitting over like 900 megahertz analog. So they apparently messed up splicing it in, and like happens. But then they also couldn't actually find a window to get the guy out from under our table covertly. And so he had been under there for like 2 hours. And so like John Boss lifts up the skirt and he's like, "So we've got this dude under your table." And I'm like, That's about it, right? Something like that. Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, man. So basically, we were like, "Yeah, that's actually really cool, like, and well played, like, on getting people under our table." So we just ran a new line and didn't cause a problem. But basically, that whole dirty tricks thing, like messing with the infrastructure, definitely was part of our game.
Totally unrelated fact, when infrastructure moved to dedicated rooms that may or may not have been in balconies, the rooms locked at some point.
But the balconies didn't? Yeah. Yeah. Who was it that climbed across from one of the balconies to the other to get into the Kenshoto skybox one year? I think that was School of Route 2.
Yeah, I don't remember. We're talking about cultural influence, actually, right before the talk. There were some bits of culture that are missing from the slide. So again, this is sort of an incomplete slide, but culture is interesting in that there's a lot of barriers, right? Especially as this becomes an increasingly international competition, right? There's teams from all around the planet that play not only in quals but also in finals these days. And there's clearly the language barrier. There's clearly a popular culture, like the hacker movies from the 80s, like some of them weren't as internationally as popular as others. So like those questions don't resonate as much, right? And those sorts of things. Time zones and holidays, right? Like there's different things to try and keep in mind. They tend to show up during trivia and question starters and things on the right-hand side, just generally when interfacing with the teams and when designing services that have ASCII protocols, right? And the words sometimes have meaning to the different cultures. There's also the culture that's influenced by CTF, where the community sort of leaves its mark in various ways. So generals and producers and actors and so forth actually come through and visit the CTF room and want to have sort of like their own individual briefing and their own sort of explanation. And you have no idea what the ramifications of those conversations are going to be and how that sort of spirals out, right? So here's a team mentioned, School of Root mentioned in the HBO show. Another sort of thing that needs to be approached by the organizers is how are you going to engage everybody, right? Not only the participants, but also the folks that are walking around and the average human attendee. So should there be ambiance? Should there be distraction? Should there be attraction? Like, should there be music at all? How loud should the music be? Should there be videos? Should there be scoreboards?
Really loud.
There's probably contention up here about that. But otherwise, if you don't consider these things, it just ends up being a bunch of people in a fairly dark room staring at computers, right? And the teams don't really have any physical interaction with each other. The attendees don't really know what they're looking at, so handouts and so forth. So this gives way to visualization. So back in, I think this is about 2002. I don't really know. I think this is a ghetto-created scoreboard.
Yeah, I think it is.
But we had scoreboards, right, projected right onto the wall.
One of the problems with showing scores is it can be really easy to get away with a win in the first day, and you might have teams start to lose interest. And this is part of, do scores always go up? This was part of, this is a zero-sum game, and you can see the teams on the bottom have a little bit of a red bar, and the bigger green bars are the top games. At some point, you're trying to keep people interested, even if in reality there's no possible way they can win anymore.
I don't know if it was us who started it, but so the first day we show scores, live scores. The second day we only show relative positions, and then finally the third day we just play back the previous.
I think there were sort of a refinement process on that. We had something where, like, I think for the last 4 hours we didn't show the scoreboard, something like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think everybody has their own variation on that theme. I think you're a little bit more extreme than has been in the past. So here's some boards kind of through time. Here's a Ken Shoto board with the ordering and the team relative placement on a line chart over time. A little bit later, still a very similar scoreboard. Even later in the Ken Shoto time, we still have the similar scoreboard, but it's also rotating with ones that have I guess innovative in some sense, like showing different types of information. So the one down in the corner is kind of showing what's left on the table. These are the points that are still sort of up for grabs, the services that need some more attention. If you open your data, you get visualizations from others. So here's some quals data that was taken by some sort of non-organizer folks and graphed over time. And it's sort of easy in different types of visualizations to see how the scores progress. So here you can see relatively quickly a lot of teams spike up, and one sort of is in the lead for a long time, but then there's still a relatively dramatic come from behind a few hours before the competition where the red line cuts up. So this, it's quals, so it's a little bit different, but this is an example of that come behind scoring that you'd like to embody in the game if you want to encourage the availability for a come behind.
There were also teams that were like fairly heavy into like using their lead psychologically during the game. Like there was a certain team that spent the last 2 hours of CTF one year very, very publicly and very sort of flagrantly having all of their people just play Guitar Hero. Mostly just as like a, you don't even need to try anymore because we've got this.
Whenever we say a certain team, we mean Chris Eagle and School.
Yeah, pretty much every time.
Just so it's clear. A certain team is always them.
So here's a new organizer took over, right? The scoreboard is still relatively basic. It's displaying the same sort of information. This is sort of one of the things that the game ends up being more important for the organizer. So the visualizations end up sort of being backburnered and then like cobbled together at the end, right? And that code doesn't persist generally from organizer to organizer. So you see this trend where like a new organizer takes over, and then it's like sort of back to square one, and it kind of builds back up. So DD-Tech's early boards look like that. Then later on they had much more appealing graphics that displayed some of the same information, but also like that's a placeholder screen on the side. And then in the end, you sort of see the more appealing side, and some attempts at trying to display types of information that are kind of hard to consume, like the bubble chart where it shows team versus team action. This one is particular in the number of writes per service. So that big blue circle is showing that like one team is like massively overriding on one particular other team instead of evenly distributing their attacks across. And then like laser gadgets and stuff like that. And then another new team takes over. Still relatively basic. They've taken a different approach where it's sort of a graph-based thing where the edges display types of information, but it's still sort of basic blocks, not particularly appealing. that
Still live.
advances over time, sort of similar
It's live.
information, but much more appealing.
Well, I was saying the dots going across were live. That was our first iteration. Now you just saw the next one. It got much better. That's all.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's sort of the point, right? It sort of evolves over time, and as an organizer, you have an opportunity to decide how you're going to try and convey information and what information you're going to convey, right? Because you want to engage the audience, but in some respect, it actually also informs all of the teams that are sitting there present, right? So in some way, this acts as an intrusion detection system. You could tell somebody's attacking you, right? So that's why you have the stage thing where it's like live, and then it's like delayed, and then it's like gone, and like however you phase it out. But these are considerations that you have to have as an organizer. So then there's I'm just going to rip through these pretty quick so we can get to questions. There's the expansion into physical space. We talked about this a little bit already, right? With the going into the custom badges that are actually scoreable. The metagame. Lockpicking is super common in lots of CTFs, like as a physical aspect to get to your passwords or your keys or start the game or whatever. Another physical thing that was tried as a service that was in the game actually controlled physical things outside the game. So like this was the robotic chicken fight. That was a service in 2011, and it was sort of an ancillary to the slide. One of the teams actually went out and got like game controllers and had an adapter interface to the service where they could actually automatically exploit the service and then control it with their PlayStation 4 controller or something. Interesting things, right? So tradition. So future organizers, I think there's a lot of aspects of tradition. If you've been a player or close to the organizers, you get some of that. We're trying to like document some of that here. But there's certainly a desire to keep DEF CON CTF the best in the world. There's certainly a desire to keep it fair and fun and innovative. There's always desire to engage the audience. You never know what the next generation of players is going to be and where they're going to come from, and you really want to have that open to everybody. There's logistics, there's game banners and team banners. The winner typically gets to bring the game banner home as part of their spoils. There's swag, there's t-shirts and stickers and so forth. Typically announcements are happening on April 1st, right? That's just a thing. Now you know when quals is gonna happen. Fortune cookies started. I think Ken Shoto started that because they had a balcony and there was a desire to throw something off the balcony. So there was the Sunday tossing of the cookies.
That's why we
the
get
fortune
coins.
cookies.
They're much bigger and they hurt worse.
Oh yeah, we had the annual Sunday tossing of the cookies.
Right.
Yeah.
And so some of those are here back in DEF CON 15. Some of these are DD Tech ones. DD Tech incorporated some of the challenges into some of the fortunes. So there's stickers, right? It's kind of a hacker thing. There's laptop stickers, and everybody's got their stickers. There's coins, as HJ mentioned. Not necessarily one of the longest lasting traditions, but there's one for every year going back a few years.
Holy
and then there's sort
shit,
of
really?
other things, right?
An actual CTF tattoo.
Stress sheep and so forth. Teams bring stuff. You can't stop them. They bring stuff. They do stuff. Particularly
This slide should have been titled, "Will there be sheep?"
They modified the stress sheep to have the LED eyes. So teams have to prepare, right? You've heard a couple people have already brought up that this is sort of a second job. It's a multi-month. It might be an all year round thing. Like, when do you start planning for next year? It's as soon as this year's over kind of thing. So there's a lot of preparation. There's setting up the servers, the configurations, building the services, building all the infrastructure if you don't already have it. And then if you do like the metagame stuff, you have to set up all the metagame stuff. You have to program the badges. We did DD Tech interface with all of the human badges. So I think if you have a human badge from DEF CON 18, you actually have CTF code in the firmware. So that's like a whole nother layer of working with other parts of DEF CON.
Did you guys end up having the thing where like every year you swore off doing it again? Like every year we were like, we're never doing this again. And then like a couple months later, you're like, well, maybe.
Well, we have some idea.
If we don't do the thing we did this year, next year, it'll be so much cooler.
I mean, there's still a couple, like even now, like maybe you could do it next year. No, it's written down. We're done.
Yeah. It was like the year that we stopped hosting was literally the year that no one stood up and was like, yeah, we're doing this. Like everybody was just like,
Yeah, we definitely got drunk at quals. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. We got this.
Yep.
Next morning, no. Just forget what we just said.
So we're talking about how much effort there is like year round. When you get there on site, there's an amazing amount of things that have to happen behind the scenes, and I say proportionally, most of what you're going to be looking at as an organizer is something like this. You'll see like the empty rooms with no participants in it. You'll be watching some of your buddies terminate network cables across the room as you're trying to make sure all of your services work.
Right now.
And this is the view that you get, or you get a view in the back room near your infrastructure servers or something like that, right?
Also, I think since you're on the topic of preparation, it's also pretty important to point out that the organizers of CTF, the entirety of the infrastructure and the code and the logistics has always been completely something provided by the people actually running CTF.
Yeah,
like our actual Kenshoto's logistics bill every year out of pocket for us was like 20 grand.
Yeah. Like, that's why I say don't cut our cables. Like,
Because
seriously.
there are cables.
So if we're
how
talking,
much it costs us to ship all the stuff out here. Like,
Yeah, shipping cost alone, the Pelican cases and all the crazy nonsense.
if we're talking proportionally what the teams see are something like this. Because again, like the table limit for fire code, or due to prizes, there's only 8 black badges. The teams are much larger than that, or some teams are, and you see extra hotel rooms with wiring all over it, and you see you'll be staring at IDA screens and debugger screens, and have your persistent servers that have UPSs strapped to the bottom of them so that you can wheel back and forth as the game goes live. So why do people play, right? These last couple slides sort of make you wonder, why, right? So why do people play? Well, there's challenge. There's some prizes, especially around the world. Some of the CTFs are getting like $30,000, $50,000 prizes, right? It's not quite like e-games, but you can't make a living at it, but you can make some money. What if you just couldn't get into talks at DEF CON, right? So you get stuck there, right?
I know, right? That's ridiculous.
I
was going to say, I think that last bullet,
pathological disorder.
Glory is the reason you play.
Glory, yeah.
So the real reason, right?
And that's why we
it's
started Capture the Flag, was to have a chance to go head to
you
head.
get the black badges.
Glory.
No, it's a black badge and a jacket. That's why you play.
Yep. Oldest black badge,
So why do organizers organize, right? So this is actually the question.
Masochism.
Yeah, this is the question. This is the first question I want to hand off to the panel. So before you do that, just very quickly, you roughly know who's up here, but to introduce them sort of officially, we have Vizzy. Wave your hand. Yeah. So Vizzy
I
sitting right
crowdsourced my bio because I'm shit at writing bios. So this is all the Twitter responses to what should my bio be.
Yep. So he crowdsourced the bio. He was an organizer, sort of a main or chief organizer for Kenshoto. Chris Eagle, down there on the end. So he was a player and then an organizer and then a player again. Lots of CTF experience from both sides. Literally wrote the book on IDA Pro.
Oh, nice. Dude, hook a brother up.
Right?
I got you. Don't you worry.
Riley?
We're rebooting. Sorry.
Caesar?
1 second. Our monitors are not working. They're giving epilepsy out.
So Caesar's talking
Momentary technical
right now.
difficulties.
That's Caesar. So he's the part of the Ghetto Hackers who won 3 times and then became the first formalized organizer and really brought it to the next level. Also known for Caesar's Challenge, sort of an annual thing here.
21 years, I have thrown a party on Saturday night because being a masochist and doing CTF wasn't enough. Find me at any time, and I will hand you a puzzle. And if you can solve it, which is not very hard this year, if you can solve it, then I buy you drinks on Saturday.
HA? Also, excuse me, a 2-time champion. Unlike the other champions, 2 different teams. Right? 2 different
First one
teams.
was Vedigod / Team Awesome, and the second one was Samurai.
And one of the current organizers, so 2013, so we're not really sure when they are going to stop.
This year, definitely.
Yeah, we're not sure when they're going to stop. And Miles, right? Miles is responsible. He's like the reason that we're all here, right? Because this wouldn't have happened if he wouldn't have started it. So
I know that our presentation's not going to do it, but I'm going to interrupt and say it's time for everyone to give this guy a big round of applause. Capture the Flag is Miles' fault.
Hacking is basically a modern watchable sport. I mean, there are Twitch feeds now for this kind of thing, right? And mostly it's all because of the bucket that you started kicking.
And with that, I'd like to kick it back off. And I think the first question will be, so why do organizers organize? And let's go in order, right, in chronological order. And then this room didn't get set up well. We don't have mics. So if you have a question you want to ask, you have to come up here and you can either take the mic or I can repeat it. And then also I'll put up I'll try this thing where you can put up a URL and you can like send questions to the podium. We'll see how that works.
I would not trust a single person in this room for that.
Yeah, it goes through Google stuff.
So Miles, why CTF?
Yeah. Why organize?
Because there wasn't a way to figure out who was best and not practice out on the live internet where the con would get shut down. And that we forget that
So you're saying it was harm reduction?
Harm reduction
for the public.
Totally. And you forget that at first I went by a NIM because I was seriously worried if my employers heard about capture the flag, I might be fired. And I worked as a security guy. And this last year I was in the Smithsonian, there's a black badge there. I mean, this is really different. So yeah, it was harm reduction, it was head-to-head. It was a chance also, if you had controlled the environment, that you could start throwing in some stuff that explains it to the general public about why would someone stand in front of the screen for so long? Well, because it's really cool, and there's these things, and it's a puzzle that they're solving. So it was clear to me that we needed something with a bit more showmanship and also a chance where attackers and defenders could go head-to-head, and that it didn't break the rest of the network and throw out the con.
Yeah, for us, we came and we felt like we knew enough about security to not necessarily need to see every single talk. So we'd catch a couple of talks and enjoy it, and then we'd kind of wander over and see Miles's game and say, gee, so I just sat down at a table. Every person who was at that table today is a dear friend of mine today, and we go out together all the time. We live near each other. We've all moved to live near each other. So my social life is Miles's fault. The Ghetto Hackers were formed because we didn't have any paper, because we didn't bring pens or paper or notebooks or hardly anything. So we had a napkin and mascara, and we wrote IP addresses that were available on the network. That was our group of friends came out of sitting around each other. And for us, after the first year we just kind of tried and saw how it was. And then after that, there was kind of this fire of, well, if we just stored every exploit we know, and that was the contest back then, was like, how many exploits can you bring in a searchable, usable format? And it just became this passion to actually just get better. So for us, we didn't necessarily try to win as much as we tried to get good, get good scrub. We were scrubs, and we came, and you kind of made a crucible, and a bunch of hackers popped out.
And then why did you run it?
Why did we run it? We ran the contest after the third year. Somebody in one of the teams said that they hated us, and we were cheating bastards, and that they didn't want to play against
hackers.
us.
Hello.
We took it as a great honor and pride, but there was something, a spark among us that made us jump up and volunteer to take the game to a new level. And so we got up on stage and talked about coming back the next year and making a new contest. And Miles was part of that contest as well. And that was how we kind of came to the scoreboard and sort of some of the trappings that are the beginnings of what these guys who won the contests that we threw, and we handed the reins to them.
That's actually kind of been a tradition. I know it was kind of touched on early, but there's also you end up feeling this sort of sense of belonging and ownership to the game when you win it also. And you have your own designs on how you want it to be or how you think it should be. So transitioning to the reason that Ken Shoto decided to run CTF for a few years, I think there's a number of facets. But for us, watching the Ghetto Hackers and watching the coalescence that it caused in the hacker community specifically, and the crucible effect actually is super huge. We would watch people literally have drive to learn all these new exploit mechanisms and all of these details about pulling packets apart and whatever. So for us, actually, I think that the biggest thing that caused us to actually run CTF was we were concerned initially that it would be taken over, instead of by someone that is about the hacker community, that it would be taken over by a university or a corporation or whatever like that. And we were very concerned about that initially. Turns out, off we go, modern times and all that. But the other reason that Ken Shoto stayed in the game, the reason that not the first year, but the reason for the years after that, was we really felt that it was sort of an unmeasured resource, right? So as an example, in our game, we were sort of one of the first people to be like, don't bring any of those exploits because they're not going to work, because it's all going to be entirely custom software with challenges that you have to reverse engineer and exploit and land payloads against, like in that weekend. And for us, that was it was really important for us because we felt that was something where people hadn't stretched far enough yet. The bar wasn't high enough, and we felt like we wanted to continue to be able to push that higher and higher, so that eventually not everyone was making it. So as an example, actually, there's also what do they call it? I think they renamed Amateur CTF, but it's called something else now.
CTF.
There's several now.
Open CTF, right? Of course.
Project 2.
So,
several, yeah.
But like that
Subtle,
as an example,
subtle humble brag there.
No, yeah, right. But that essentially formed out of the fact that we tried to push the game into actually measuring the real red line of what people were capable of in a weekend, and that really drove us for the years after the first year that we hosted. The first year was because we were super concerned that it was going to become this like corporate sponsorship kind of thing, and after that it was because we thought that the performance that we had seen warranted further measurement, higher and higher. So.
And that is a perfect transition to hand to Mr.
Right?
Spilleroo.
Because we had a lot of the same reasons. So we had played in Miles' game, we played in Caesar's game, we played in Vizzy's game, and we loved every iteration. I teach, and it turned out that the game, as it evolved, was a great microcosm of the security space in which to conduct teaching and learning. My students got really excited about it, so we loved the game as it was. I loved the game the last year we played with Ken Shoto. And when they stepped down, we were also very worried that some company would come in and commercialize this thing. And we looked around and would say, well, who's going to run it? We couldn't imagine who might run it.
That's exactly.
I think there was one other team that might have run it. We didn't know what they would pitch. So we made our pitch. I think another team made their pitch. And we basically, but you lost.
Our pitch was basically, if you don't give it to us, it's going to suck.
Ours was, if you give it to them, it'll suck. And we really liked the game and wanted to see it continue in much the same vein. Of course, it didn't occur to us that we then wouldn't get to play for 4 years. And then
Playing is way more fun than
why
running.
we kept running it was more or less, well, we screwed that one up. Maybe it'll be better next year. I think we might have got it. We got it close to right the
your
fourth
last
time.
year was good.
Yeah, we got it close to right the fourth. It actually started on time.
You did? You didn't delete all of our scores?
Yeah. So,
Chris, before you stop, Chris, how did it change your team's experience, your school's experience, to go from playing to running it to playing? What do you play differently because you ran it?
No. Playing to running is a really tough thing. So it's an entirely different mindset to become an organizer, right? So yeah, if you're doing Vulc dev type stuff, and then now you've got to turn around and write it. You got to write with an entirely different mindset. Writing a challenge is no easy task. It's easy to put one bug in the challenge of a very specific nature. It's a little more difficult not to put other bugs in that you didn't mean to.
Yeah, it's really hard to write secure, insecure code.
just exploitable enough.
Yeah. And
how many of you have found exploits in code you were adapting? Because I know I was finding exploits out there. It's like, wow, that's been vulnerable since 90. And
We actually had two challenges that literally just incorporated a library that we knew had an ODE in it.
Yeah, and we wrote challenges like that too. You take things from real world and you try to bake it into this challenge. We didn't want to drop mountains of software like, okay, here's Apache, find the ODE. Which was easier, 10 years ago. But so yeah, everything was pretty stripped down, and you try to build the bug you want people to hit, and you try not to have other bugs. So from running to organizing, that mindset was hard for some people to adapt to. So we did lose a lot of people actually from the playing side. That's what they want to do. They want to keep on playing. I don't blame them. But yeah, we were a much smaller group when we during the time we spent running it.
That tails into another question. This thing's actually working, so we're getting questions that are coming in.
Sweet.
So you want to answer HJ, and then I'll follow into
I
the
think
next
a
question.
short
which
and
is-
sweet was anything you can do, I can do better. We played text game and got 2 black badges out of it. Sorry, we played their game, got 2 black badges, and saw what they did, and knew how we were assholes and how to beat ourselves, and decided we could make an interesting game.
Masochism.
What's that?
I was just going to say it all boils down to masochism.
Yeah. Like we know how, we make people upset about how we beat their defenses. But anyway, so yeah, same reason. Like we played their game and thought we could do better or do things differently and take it in an interesting direction for the community. So.
And they've done an amazing job. And I will say that one thing as an organizer, the only thing I'll add is the only fun you can have in organizer is trying to fuck with the players.
Totally true. Absolutely 100%
So
true.
whether it's a challenge you design or some new twist, the badge challenge, the custom
really still
art
get a
books,
kick out
or
of
challenges that were actually purposely not actually exploitable. There was a bug, but it like couldn't be landed.
No,
That's
ours are always.
You thought there was a bug, and now you want
Except
to
for
say you were
PvP.
fucking with the players.
What's that?
Yours are always
Yeah,
exploitable
revisionist.
unless your index is 0.
Oh, that was an accident.
one team, yeah.
For one team, yeah, it was exploitable.
So the follow-on question, which perhaps I'll ask Chris first, since you already kind of started answering it. How big are the organizing teams? And you can sort of take that with the transition from player to organizer, and everybody else can answer it.
Well, we went from about 900 players down to you probably a core that topped out around 10. But there was even a subset of that was a little more active. But for the 4 years we ran it,
We're around 10 as well.
Yeah, Kinshota was around 8. We had a
But
couple of outside contributors.
Yeah, but composes between like people who write challenges, people who organize. Like Guy, who's actually the head, he's more of like having to deal with DEF CON stuff. We've got one guy who's just an amazing network guy. No joke, he is the person that Cisco calls when they can't answer a problem. Not even joking.
Yeah, we were as many as 14, but we did, we made movies, we did all sorts of stuff, but it was really only, I think, 6 or 8 people that were the core of our team.
You were one.
Yeah.
Miles was the
There was one.
Army of one.
And at the end, was it still one, or you had grown into a couple of people at the last couple?
It was 1, and that's why it was time to hand it on.
Yeah. You lasted longer. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. So it turns out that this thing allows you to vote. So there's actually like most popular questions. What is the most unexpected way someone solved the challenge? So there's like an intended path, and then there's like unintended paths. So
There's a lot of them.
Well, I mentioned
they
the
used a
background
free
thing.
BSG jailbreak to get out of our jails.
Yeah.
But we watched them do it, and they were so inept when they got out.
Yeah, people bringing Odays and then completely messing up using them correctly would be it's a good one.
My favorite one was I had managed to, let's see, Quake was the hot game in DEF CON 4, 5. So I managed to talk id Software into donating Quake licenses to the Capture the Flag contest. So I had Quake servers and a couple of stations set up so that people could play Quake, and then I got free video games out of it. So all good. And so someone came up to me and said, we have denial of service, but it's not on the network. We can attack the Quake server, and one of the people gets so pissed off, he goes over and reboots the machine, and that causes it to reboot so we can run our RC script. I said, go for it.
We convinced a team to surrender and give us all their points by telling them that we were about to win, even though they were ahead. And so they joined and all became ghetto hackers.
Actually, I'm gonna relay something we were talking about earlier, an anecdote we were talking about specifically in the ghetto hackers playing. So it wouldn't be an instance of Caesar having seen this occur as a novel way to score points or win the game, but having executed a novel way to win the game. They basically convinced the CTF organizers at the time that they needed to store a half rack of equipment that they had. So they had your little like. What would it be, 20-ish U rack. And they had completely built out entire faceplates of real servers and stuff. And they like stuffed a person into the half rack and actually got them to store it in the room with all the rest of the CTF equipment and infrastructure overnight. Because they're like, well, we need a place to put this, right? And so obviously out creeps person.
Single roots all the machines.
Single roots all the boxes.
Reboots them all.
Peace.
Puts them in single user mode. Roots them all. We come back in the morning, having not prepared or worked or done anything the night before.
Like, we win.
Come in, we'd be like, we're been drinking all night. The contest is over, so let's all just go home. And we got a whole bunch of points, and it was pretty good. The contest was not over.
Well, no,
we
I
did not go
already
home.
mentioned the Bash RC one, which is fantastic. When we were playing, we once snuck the root certs from one of the teams and got first blood on every service. That was during your game.
This works pretty good. I can just like go to the next most popular one. So how do you come up with unique flags or challenges? I think that means challenges or services every year, aside from following CVEs or repeating content from.
That was actually a serious source of exhaustion.
It is. That's
like,
actually
like mental exhaustion of attempting to come up with services. And we used to end up even, like, we would literally scrap 2 or 3 services every year because they wouldn't get deployed correctly or they wouldn't be done. But like coming up with unique ideas of like, oh, here's a web service that helps you make a sandwich, like, or whatever.
Well, and now with 20 years of DEF CON
Exactly.
history.
Now you want to like do something original and like.
And that's just DEF CON history. That's not talking about every other CTF.
All the other CTFs, yeah, for sure.
100 plus probably per year. And how do you actually be unique? You can't really be unique anymore.
No, definitely not.
That's why
we would actually basically, the real truth of the story, how we produced our services was mostly about getting a bunch of people in a room, getting a bunch of whiskey in the room too, and like just bullshitting until funny ideas came out, and then like codifying that list into services. And then going and deciding what kind of exploit goes into it, what kind of whatever. But every one of those services had a little.
For us, what we've done is we've really introduced multiple architectures. Like 3 years ago, I think we had 5 different architectures in one game. I think it was x86 and MIPS. We even had Windows IoT ARM challenges running a Power PC shell or something like that. I don't know. And this year, of course, like I mentioned, we have the custom architecture that we built. But it really is, we've had to push it.
Nobody's quite explained this. Custom architecture means a system for storing bits in electronics.
Right. So imagine
an
like
instruction
things like
set.
They implemented a CPU instruction.
Yeah, we implemented a CPU.
Processor, a VM, all up on top of nothing. It's whole cloth.
By
it's
we,
fantastic.
I mean Lightning actually did it, but single-handedly.
Epic.
Yeah, it's just pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty much and the caliber of people who are playing are just phenomenal. Like they frighten me now. People like Loki and GeoHodge, scary good. Yep. So the challenges, the level that we have to do for the difficulty has astronomically increased. Like the medium challenges back in the day are now easy challenges for everybody.
Yeah, tools have gotten so much better too. You don't want to write a challenge that's going to be auto-solved by a tool under a minute. So,
yeah, like things like anger and stuff like that.
You have to keep up with the state of the tools and try to find the weaknesses in the tools so that you still get the human who's got to do the deep dive.
That's a good segue into the next actually set of questions. There's several related to CGC and sort of automation. Lessons learned from Cyber Grand Challenge. It's been a year. Was it a success?
Hackers are obsolete.
Was it a success or a failure? I'm looking for one. I sorted these and now I can't find one that I saw earlier. There's this one. Mostly for Vizzy. How many years until a computer wins DEF CON CTF? Right?
That's
So the thing that the computers have trouble with, right, is the dirty tricks department. And so I think it'll be a while, unless a game is designed specifically for the computer system. I mean, that's really kind of where we're at. Like right now, I think CGC was a really good example of this just massive leap forward in technology. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that it was a reduced instruction set and a reduced syscall set and all these other things that add a really sufficient level of complexity that I think there's still a lot of room, a lot of wiggle room for like the human dirty tricks department kind of mindset. So I think it'll be a little while yet. But it depends kind of on the structure of the game. So if elements of the game require creative thought and unique approaches, I think that'll continue to kind of be an arms race.
I only think it matters if they have arms. If you have to actually go lockpick something that the computer won't do that well.
Oh, and actually, that's a really good example because you guys were notorious specifically for incorporating into CTF a whole bunch of side games, where those side games were like every team gets issued this ancient hard drive that was like gigantic, and that hard drive is painted your team's color, and it's going to be out at the DEF CON shoot, which I think still happens, right?
Miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, the incorporating the DEF CON shoot was mine.
Right.
That turned out to be a really bad idea.
Right. Well, and so basically, I think a team got some bonus points for like having like basically punched a hole with a bullet like through the most center point of the drive or something like that. Computers aren't going to do that for a little while yet. So
The other aspect with computers is you have to freeze the game, right? Chess doesn't change. Chess is chess. It's been chess forever, and a computer knows how to play chess. And
yeah, how would the computer deal with this new architecture?
Yeah.
Right.
So we want to see something different every year. We want to throw curveballs every year, and it's unless you advertise that some amount of time in advance, like the CGC version that you guys did last year. I think in DEF CON CTF in particular, I don't think we'll ever see it because that's not the game we humans want to play.
All we'll ever need is 64K of RAM, right?
So what probably wasn't clear earlier, but 4 people up here were involved in the CGC competition in some way. And then for those that aren't aware, DEF CON CTF last year was mostly more or less CGC compatible, right? And the winner of CGC, the machine, was a player in the CTF competition last year, which kind of ties all these questions back into the panel. So it's sort of a related question that I won't direct at anybody in particular, but so it's been a year, right? CGC was last year, and the CTF that had the computer was a year ago. Was that a success, a failure? Was it sort of a nod in history?
I would say it was definitely a success. I really am a fan of the fact that Anger was released open source. I think
So
getting these tools out to the general community is fantastic. The fact that anybody can go and use these and learn how to write software, or write tools to automatically RE and go towards exploitation is fantastic. When you can lower the bar to entry, it really makes it that much better.
Learning how the teams did their job last year is probably the best thing that anyone in the audience, any of us, could imagine doing for their career for the next year.
And to be honest, even
state of the art.
Future RE just in normal careers is going to be automated. Software is becoming so incredibly difficult. Some amount of automation is going to be required just to get even the low-hanging fruit anymore. So we have to incorporate this idea into CTF so that we can still be representative of the wider security community.
Yeah, I think that the mistake people make when they look at CGC is to think that the goal was to build a purely autonomous system, and that wasn't the goal. The goal was to advance the state of the art in software analysis. And what we'll see it. We saw it last year. We'll see it this year. Is that software automatons assisting humans, making humans better at what they're doing is probably where we're going. The best chess playing systems in this world are hybrid systems that pair computers with chess players, not purely computers.
Yeah, I think we've seen that too in like even other CTFs now with modern things like Anger being applied in an automated way to catch some of the low-hanging fruit or point out areas of the code that's like this probably. Like it can't necessarily automatically generate an exploit for every condition yet. So
we've actually had challenges that required Anger or some automated reverse engineering. That
Absolutely.
Was like I think it was called 1,000 cuts by Vito, where you were given 1,000 binaries really fast, and you had to be able to exploit them in computer speed, not human speed. There's even a challenge on pwnable.kr called AEG, where it requires you download it, and it gives you a random binary every time, and you have to auto-RE it and write the exploit.
So how international has CTF become? When did international teams start showing up, and do Americans still stand a chance?
One of the first things that I remember happening was Dylan Kanabaran from Hack in the Box reached out and asked if he could take CTF. Obviously, do it yourself. I mean, do whatever you want. But that was taking CTF to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in I think 2001. So it's been coming for a long time. It's been diversifying and spreading rapidly. It's I think one of the most true and honest ways that hackers can really be better than each other, because we're not very good, I think, otherwise at knowing, like, am I good enough? And being able to say, well, I'm better than that guy is a huge, huge foundation to stand on.
We have competitors from all over. Like, we've got Korean and Taiwanese and Chinese, and most major areas of the world are represented. And actually, 2 years ago, DEF CON from, I believe, Korea actually won our game. So It was one of the first times that I can remember. The Nopsled one, they were mostly Danish, that they've won CTF.
I remember actually, it kind of like goes back to some of the slides you were talking about earlier with the language barrier stuff. I think the first like fully like non-English speaking team was a couple of the Korean teams that were fielded early on in the Kenshoto CTF, and like we actually had to really specifically sit down and think like, what are we going to do about this? Because we don't want to create a game like the game isn't about English, the game is about bits, right? And so like we actually tried to create we actually went through several iterations of attempting to create like pictographic representations of like stealing a key submission and things like that with like little like, you know, stick figures and stuff like that, because the language barrier was so significant that I remember actually one of the captain of the Korean team at the time, they did amazingly well in quals. They like whomped everyone in quals that year. They show up at the actual game and they had a lot of trouble, but it was mostly about understanding what was going on and the actual mechanisms of the game. And the captain of that team came up to me and was like, I think this next year we're going to work on hacking English.
Nice.
Some of those stickers, I think that might have become stickers later on.
Yeah, no, they were totally stickers.
At the top there, you can see them.
Oh yeah, actually, no, that's exactly some of what I'm talking about. We were like, yeah.
So I mean, clearly you didn't make those like right then, but like that became a thing for later. Yeah. So I guess speaking of that, what's with all the Japanese or like sort of Asian references, right? So like when Miles ran it, it had like the big.
It's his fault.
The red.
Did you ever put Go to Miles?
The Japanese thing, right?
No, I think that was actually.
Was that Ghetto? Okay.
We did. We decided that we wanted to give away a championship belt, so we gave away the Root Fu Championship. It was like a boxing belt,
like a literal like WWF like belt.
Yeah. So we made up this whole concept of Root Fu. And it was going to be, a measure of how good you could compete against other people. And it basically turned into hacking, and the whole thing fell down. But as a theme, we had all the cultural references in Blade Runner and hackers. And I mean, the connection to Cyberpunk, Chatsubo. I think it was just kind of the Gestalt hacker meme at the time, as were a whole lot of bad ideas and things that were growing past. So we don't have to live in that world forever, but I think it was just the way everything grew up then.
We kind of just followed suit. I mean, Kenshoto actually, the name is in Japanese, right? So for us, there was that tie-in, but it was mostly out of the influence of that same sort of cyberpunk picture that you guys had created.
And one of our founding members, Brazen Angel, is a Korean woman who fits in a half rack, it turns out. And she and Data Angel did all of what we called the Ghetto News Network. We did news videos that were kind of in the Blade Runner. If you remember the movie Blade Runner, up on the screens, there's some kind of Asian commercials, I think, over like a soda.
Absolutely.
We kind of took that image and we just blew it out and made a whole fake news system.
They had her basically congratulating teams on not fucking up the network, as I recall correctly.
So I just have some backup slides that show some of that. There's I can't remember what that's called, but it's like the Japanese thing for something religious, the red thing in the background there. And certainly the Japanese stuff continues over time. So what's I wanted to, this one. So how do you find middle ground in the challenges between the ones that are too easy and the ones that are too hard?
Everything is too easy.
Yep.
Hackers are so much better when they're under pressure than we are when we're sitting around trying to be cool.
The way we had to modify our scoring algorithm, the way we do it, is so for quals, everything starts out at 5 points except for babies first. And the more people solve it, the less it becomes worth. So it just they were self-correcting. Yep. Because it's funny, if you write a challenge, it's really hard to judge how hard it is when you write it yourself.
So wait, it's 5 points when I get it, but then so many people follow along that I lose my points?
Right. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's so much smarter.
We made other people in Kenshoto actually do all the challenges with no prior knowledge of them. And
testing.
Testing, essentially.
Time is the problem.
Because the problem is it's also it's really easy to implement a challenge where there's some leap of faith that you didn't realize you've made. and that other people wouldn't and aren't part of like a logical analysis progression. And so that being the case, like we had found challenges. Actually, there were one or two in your guys' game too, and there have been others, and specifically and usually in quals rounds, where like there's some like leap of faith required. If you actually, I think the best examples are listen to the crazy ass explanations of the DEF CON badge challenges, where they're like, I realized that these dots were actually Morse code of geolocation things that were airports, that then if you arrange the airports and then reverse their letters, and just all these things that you're like, why did you think to do that in the first place? And so like we didn't want to have challenges that were why did you think to do that in the first place? We wanted there to be this sort of like thread through them. And essentially the way that we enforced that was just entirely, here you go, other person on Kenshoto, like go break this and solve it.
It's also really easy to make questions that are easy for your top 1%. And so it's like no one gets it, and the top 1% gets it in 5 minutes, and then where's the rest of the contest?
Well, but that's so for the real game, that's what we were shooting for, because we were basically, if anyone was topping out that bar and solving all the challenges, they weren't hard enough, right? So for us, we considered it a failure in any year if someone solved all the challenges. And so I think that the pushing of that scale to being higher, we didn't really concern ourselves in the real game with that approachability or middle ground, but in quals we did, because that's the thing that like everybody gets to play, everybody gets to be inspired and do something. Right?
One of the things that we did for quals was that we really, prior to us, they had things like forensics and trivia. And because those weren't really necessary for the actual finals game, we only did like punables, we did like guerrilla programming, things that you have to know in order to succeed in finals. So forensics, where you have to go and take the first bit of every sector off the NTFS drive or section. Oh, that was terrible. That was also before you did flag, open brace, close brace. That's when you were guessing.
Yeah, we left those in because we wanted quals to be accessible to a large number of people.
Yeah, it was a conscious decision for us.
That's why we added babies first, because we wanted that same approachability without it still be directly be directly applicable to the game.
Play school, my first heap exploit.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever seen evidence of collusion?
So
we literally
I was
colluded with teams all
won
the time.
via collusion.
We only won by collusion.
Where's Xeon? Is he here somewhere? There he is.
So I think at this stage in the game, for us, most people have at least begin treating it by like a gentleman's game. Like we genuinely want to see who is the best, and other teams feel the same way. Yeah. Like for example, a few years ago, there was a team for some reason who put a wiki up on the game network, and that wiki had their passwords on it. And one of the teams, actually the Yonops letters, came up and said, "Hey guys, we saw these guys had a wiki up. You should probably tell them." And that was during finals, where they could have gone and just completely just wiped all their flags and just ran the board. But it's really become, like I said, a gentleman's game. So for the most part, I don't think
it was like in our game, like we were owning other people's laptops and stuff too. Like if it was connected to the network.
So that's sort of breaking outside of the intended path, but that's not really collusion, right?
There was legitimate team collusion, at least in one of the Ghetto Hacker wins, and I mentioned Xeon and Didrev and stuff like that from back in the day, because that's actually a really hard thing from a game mechanic to detect. Mm-hmm. And so we actually I mentioned the idea of like, to like mess with the teams, we had services that weren't exploitable, but they were actually canary services, because if someone submitted a token from another team, either the game mechanism was broken and they managed to get tokens they shouldn't be able to, or they're colluding. Mm-hmm. So we were very concerned about that, because it's almost impossible to totally prevent, right? If you're just like slide a couple of tokens by here and there between two teams so that they can like get way far out ahead, you make it so that it's a race between 2 rather than 8 or 10, right?
Yeah, for us, the biggest problem with collusion happens in quals. You have less control over quals than what's going on in the game itself, because it's not on your own infrastructure. They're not in a room.
I actually think our game mechanic that we do, where if you submit more than submit the keys, that score drops for everybody. You'll see. So back whenever I actively played, I had a team myself. I would go and test the keys to see if it worked. And however, that's actually a bad move now, because if you were to do that, you actually drop the score for everybody, including your own team. Yeah. So if you start colluding, there's a possibility that somebody will actually pull ahead of both of you. So
Yeah, 'cause you end up cutting those.
strategy, right? Because now the people that are you can dilute flags that are more important to other teams.
Yeah,
Right, but if
Jay,
you're
is that specific to quals?
that's specific quals.
Yeah.
But if you're on top, then you're on top, right? So that's not going to affect too much.
I mean, we built collusion detection into quals because we had unique challenges were tweaked in a small way, or everybody had their their own service,
Or
their own accounts,
monitoring source IP addresses of submissions, and
people would say, "I can't log into my account." That's because you're using somebody else's creds, and you're not supposed to see those creds unless you've been sharing. The keys were different per team, so we did set up some services that were specifically to detect teams that were sharing
it
answers.
takes a massive amount of work.
I think the conclusion is that as an organizer, you're increasingly playing game theory. We're playing a game. Everybody else is doing an activity. We make an activity, and for us, it's a game. And maybe that's why we like to
So that's why
organize.
you organize, because you want to play the game.
Kinda, yeah.
Well, we know the tricks for the game, so we try to beat them.
Yeah, for sure.
So here's a perhaps interesting question. So why is the finals attack defense style? Why don't you just continue Jeopardy style?
Oh, because that's not hacking.
Yeah,
Right, yes,
because reality.
Yep.
Because that's bullshit.
If we wanted to be a puzzle game, it would be a puzzle game. We want it to be a hacking game.
There's almost zero pressure in Jeopardy, right?
Right,
You sit back
exactly.
and you answer questions and you're in your living room.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Attack defense, there's
Head
a
to head.
reactive nature to that, and that can cause people to shut down.
And we've always wanted to make a contest that everyone could start. Everyone could start down the road to winning DEF CON CTF, and we needed something that's hard enough that it actually slows people down who aren't ready.
So it adds another game mechanic in terms of, so for example, defense, like patching. I can patch my binary, but there's a chance that it will now fail polls. So
And the whole SLA discussion from
And
earlier.
We've also added a game mechanic in our game where we have a concurrency for patches. So if you patch something and all you do is add 40 hex 40 to the side of the stack, well, that's published now, so everybody can see what you just patched.
If you take nothing else away from this conversation, that is the piece of sheer genius that we've been missing this whole time since we started playing.
Agreed.
Is when you add defense, everyone else has an opportunity to do the same. That turns it, I think, really into a game, finally, for the players, because now, do I accept your patches blind?
Oh, PPP, like they've definitely backdoored patches. Like they'll patch something and then go ahead, use our patch. See what happens.
Yeah, and like purposely deploying patches that then cause other people to try and analyze those to figure out what was going on. Purposely deploying a harmless patch that doesn't actually necessarily fix anything, but sufficiently complicates something
Or
that
a patch with QEMU bugs.
use resources of the other team having to try and reverse engineer. Like, what the hell does that patch mean?
I've
You
definitely
can
heard of patches with QEMU bugs in them.
Yup.
Yeah, you can create an obfuscated code contest, sub-contest, as a player now while you use this system.
Which really ultimately becomes like a team captain leadership triage contest, really, because
Who came up with this idea?
So it was actually the guys who did CGC. That was their idea.
Yeah, it came from
I thought
CGC.
it was
Just,
genius. It was
just the most
fantastic.
important thing that's happened.
How about what's the I can't find the exact wording. What's the hardest question or service that each of you have ever fielded in your tenure?
That's hard.
super tough.
Yeah, and it's like no preparation. You just have to come up with it. But like, which one do you?
I would say every new CTF is so much harder than the old ones that listening to anybody but Hawaii Joe is probably a waste of time. Because the new contests are just so much harder.
So I'll give
I invented a CPU in order to write bugs on. Is such a high bar.
One of our guys, Salir, sorry, not Salir, it was J-Dub, he wrote a MUD, a full-featured MUD, where you had to go in and collect certain numbers of items from each, from NPCs, and then that's your shellcode. So in the place. Then you actually trigger the overflow, and the number of items you have of different types becomes your code. Yeah, your shellcode. Right.
So we
Nobody
had a
solved that
MUD.
one.
We had a MUD, but you could hit A lot of times, and then hit Enter, and it would crash.
Yeah, no. This
See,
is
the game is not the same thing.
What was really fun is he made us all God mode characters, so we got to walk around in it, and it was really funny because if somebody attacks you, you can't stop attacking back. It just happens automatically. Right. So eventually I realized, all right, we don't hit these guys because if you hit them, I just die.
We had a mud a couple of years, but it was all just about like the social aspects of quals. It was where everybody would talk and hang out and stuff during quals. But effectively, we ended up like killing all the players a couple of times by accident. Like some monster that one of the other Kenshoto people was creating like got loose, and we didn't. I don't know.
Oh, so Sirgun, the guy who wrote the mud, is also the guy who developed the badge that you saw up there. So that badge he designed, and we floated ourselves on a hot plate. Like not even joking. We put it on there, did all the solder and the components, and floated on a hot plate. And that was, you had to exploit it over RF. You can send them all text messages back and forth.
So a slight twist question that came in from the audience. What about the most elaborate challenge that you were able to dream up but that couldn't quite pull off? It was like still on the to-do list.
Let me make sure I can act.
A really good
I
scoreboard.
can actually talk.
Ours was the World Series of Poker Printer Challenge.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That's we started to destroy that thing. You're like, no, it's not our printer.
We
Yeah, I remember that one.
One year at the Rio, we rolled in right after the World Series of Poker had ended, and in the back rooms were all the printers that they had used for the World Series of Pokers, and we just wheeled one out and put one on every table. Everyone had an Ethernet jack. we ran cable to every table, and we wanted to work that into the game, but didn't quite get there. Well, some of them got fully disassembled and never reassembled.
Yeah, I think
There's actually some significant analysis on the internet.
Yeah,
of
DEF
some
CON
of those
ended up having to
printers.
pay for a few printers, I think.
Gyno, are you here? No. I was trying to ask if I can mention his challenge, but I guess I'll go ahead. I sent him a text message. So he came up with an awesome idea, GDB over phone. So we dial in, and it says, "This is your prompts," and he actually got a decent way into the challenge. Like press 1 for R. All right, these are your registers. All right, step. That was but we couldn't. The bandwidth or throughput just wasn't enough for that one.
Operator.
Oh my god, that's great. That's great.
Real person.
Well, then, like, do the teams have to implement
Didn't you
like
guys
audio,
own
like
the
language
Asterisk
processing in
server?
order to automate
Either
the
that or
debugging?
you're on the phone.
Hang on.
Like,
At Goa, at NullCon, I was really proud of one of the kids there. He made a DTMF only attack for IVRs. He found a SQL injection attack in the default template for IVRs running asterisk. So he had a compressed DTMF string that he could play into an IVR and get it to read out the username and password of all of the accounts allowed to edit the system.
Awesome.
And the phone came out. He used his own voice, so it was hard for me to understand. But nothing to do with our game. But you can make DTMF attacks.
Yeah.
It turns out it takes only about 50 milliseconds or something to get a digit through.
When did black badges start being awarded? Was it always 8?
We got the first ones. I think they were. I don't know actually when black badges came out.
Third time when the team was huge because DT didn't have anywhere. I was saying they were when the team was, I think, the largest ever team. It was like
20 people.
20 odd people, and DT standing there like with one black badge. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so he went and grabbed, and he could like spare 8 total. So
That's hilarious.
that became 8 of us got black badges. The rest of them did not.
Because we picked 8 people for a team. We picked 8 people for our team for the first year because you guys did, and you probably picked it because at some point he just had 8 badges. That's kind of funny.
8 teams, 8 badges.
Yeah,
turns out.
all right.
8 players.
That
8
was
teams,
that was based
8
on
badges.
that was also based on the table layout at the time. Like there were like 8 approximate seats without whatever. And so we basically decided that you couldn't have more than that at the table.
I think it's still the same.
Yeah.
We limit the size of the table just because of just managing it all as a pain.
Right. Which, I mean, doesn't really prevent large teams, but what it does do is gives large teams the same problem that large organizations in real life have, which is left-hand, right-hand communication problems and organizational problems. Because, 20 people sitting at a table can still kind of coalesce and, self-organize, but 20 people divided into 2 groups sitting in 2 different rooms can't.
In the real world, you can buy a fractional T3 or buy a private line and have it run and have somebody put up some VPNs friends and buy some keys and walk them over there and all these things. Here, you've got 48 hours to end the contest from the time you know where you're going to be, and getting a remote team connected is
limiting
huge.
the effectiveness of a large team was one of our driving ideas.
Yep.
And the way we've done that is that we actually don't. When the game first started, like during DD Tech, they would just give you all the services immediately, except for maybe a few handful of exceptions. Now, we'll drop one service. So, sure, you have 50 people. Let all 50 people look at one service. Good luck. All right, have fun.
Limiting parallelism.
Limiting parallelism is what we do. And then maybe later we'll do two more services. Or so on.
Yeah, we never thought of anything like that. I wish we had, because limiting team size was a huge motivator for us too.
For a certain team.
Two, actually.
Yeah, it's
You and Shellfish.
It's sort of interesting because it also plays into the sort of distribution inside of a team, right? Like how many rock stars are there, and how fast does it drop off, and like what does the curve look like?
We also started implementing what we do. We patch a service. So like real world, we'll implement the basic functionality of a service, and then maybe midday on Saturday, drop a completely new one, and the original bug is patched. So now you have to pull the person who was originally the de facto expert on that service, and they now have to do this new thing, because do you really want to ramp up somebody else on the same service, or pull them? So yeah, we've really spent a lot of time thinking about these game mechanics and how to make it more playable and useful for the real world.
Yep. So how many women have participated?
I know that More Smoked Elite Chicken has at least had female participation. Unfortunately, not enough.
We had more than 25% every year that we played.
Wow.
We did not try to make a conscious inclusion of people. We picked the best people we knew, and in Seattle, that's a mixed group.
We had women with us, not a huge percentage, but we had women with us every year with School of Root.
Imagine they just don't want to smell us. We start stinking after a day.
Participation-wise, there have been a lot of mixed teams, but by far, it's obviously been lopsided.
Yeah.
What about as organizers?
Lightning, her name is Jewel. The person who wrote this.
Well, again, just a
Full
phenomenal,
stop.
phenomenal piece
like
of
custom
work.
architecture implemented by a woman for absolutely, yeah.
We're not looking for a winner. I'm just.
No.
No, we found one. You weren't looking for it, but we found it. Yeah, we found the winner of CTF.
Exactly.
And it is apparently Lightning.
I feel like just putting this up here, even though it's clearly a troll. But Frank wants to know. He's hacked the Gibson and only got a partial download of the garbage file. So can you help him look through it?
I think
There's a person in the audience who does not know what this means, and we just found this out right before we walked into this room.
I think you need a fusion shot or a rabbit or hack the planet or something.
Blank, right?
I kinda have to
Blank,
do it.
yeah,
It's like,
blank.
It's like the only question that's been posted that wasn't anonymous, so I felt like I had to actually put it up there. So here's a curious question, at least to me. Did you do dry runs, and like how many people would participate in the dry run? If you did do
we
dry
never
runs,
had time.
We can't. Well, time plus we can't do dry run. Right?
We did,
because we really only trust ourselves.
We did dry runs of individual services.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So the idea of the like dry run thing of like here other member of Kinjoto or whatever, like try and solve this challenge. But other than that, no
Internal
way.
beta testing, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. Unit testing and not integration or systems testing.
No, that all
like the
happens.
None of
system
our
goes
systems
online
ever
like
worked on day
at the
one
real
because we
game.
didn't test them.
Yeah, exactly. And we had to make changes like last second all the time, like every year.
Yeah, we did it as well. I mean, we did it for all of our automated polling, scoring, all of that stuff. I mean, the second part of the question doesn't make sense to me, right? How do you stop any info leak? That's an OPSEC thing.
Well, that's why we didn't
Well, I think
allow
it's
outside dry
assuming
run.
that
There
you
was no
did, like, some
full-fledged.
sort of beta run or something, then like more people haven't. It sounds
we
like
didn't have.
nobody
It
did.
was
way.
only team,
No
right?
way.
It wasn't like we opened it to public beta or something
No
like that.
way.
It was only our internal dev team.
Yeah.
So I think in
It's
that
probably
case,
one of the
second
reasons
half
code
doesn't make
hasn't even
sense.
transacted from hand to hand, really, is just because we all feel like, at least I think we felt like we wanted to play Miles's game, and then once we kind of got on the inside, we didn't want to be tainted. We didn't want to taint anybody else. We wanted all of our friends to be able to enjoy the game that they love.
Yep. Totally.
5? Oh, we're done? Okay. The program says another 9 minutes, but we can be done if you want us to.
My beer's empty.
Mine too.
All right, last
No more beer.
question then.
Let's go.
What qualities do you admire most in the teams that compete?
Fury. Like there are teams that just like throw down and they don't do anything else. They don't sleep. They don't eat.
Do you remember the Mad Swedish
Passion.
Hackers?
Yes.
I gotta say, like,
I admire no whining.
Yeah. As an organizer, that becomes a big problem. I agree. Like that's a big issue. But
Yeah,
just the
I would say
fury,
same
the
thing.
passion of it.
like, the fact that you can go and you spend 12 hours, 10 hours in front of a PC, and then you go and spend all night in front of doing the same thing. It's pretty hardcore. Like I admire all of it. Yeah. That's,
Yeah, the endurance. It really is at some point an endurance
and
feat.
you know what's funny is thinking about that is you're right now the cost entry is, well, they get free entry now. It wasn't when you guys was the case, but they get 8 badges per team. But before, when you'd have to pay,
We didn't even get badges.
oh yeah, when you pay, you go and you come here, like especially people coming from far away, like Russia and Japan, and they spend their entire weekend in front of a computer. The exact same thing they do at home, but they come in here and do it. So.
Yeah. Aside from that, the thing that always shocked me as an organizer, time to solve is the thing that I always looked at, right? Something drops like radically faster than you expected it. That's like an instant.
That's frightening
wow.
sometimes.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and the level, it's not just the stamina and like, I can drink a bunch of Mountain Dew. It's I put in the 10 months getting to this.
That's true. A lot
height.
of people bring, like now you have to bring custom stuff. Like for
Right.
example, when he was mentioning that if you pull a flag and you don't encrypt it, it's going to get caught. Because, that's one thing we mentioned too is that all the teams have access to the packet captures. So they see all the data coming across the network and they control what's coming in and out of the box. So if you don't encrypt your data back and forth in your shellcode has to implement this encryption, then you're going to fail.
All right. You have something?
Just one of the things in time to crack. I don't know if it was you guys. One of our routers leaked 1 bit of information, and the scoreboard had a different TTL off by 1 from the.
I remember. No, that was. I remember.
Was that
that
you?
was us. Yeah.
Was that you guys?
Yeah.
The TTL
We could
on the
basically
packets,
we could tell apart the packets that were your engine testing that a service was online from everyone else.
So they
we were
firewalled
just like,
only the players.
nobody
they
else
had
can get
100%
packets through.
SLA, 0% defense.
Yeah.
And they did this in maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 minutes from the time we handed them their discs. It was amazing.
We profiled TTL and your user agents on your.
Yeah, we missed that one. We didn't. Yeah.
All right, we've got the cutoff, so the slides will be posted and the video will be posted. So let's thank the panelists, and I suppose we'll be around for a little bit.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.